Very much, Haley. Welcome, Reuters Automotive Summit participants. To get things started here, I just want to ask a quick question of the panelists that we have here today, because it's kind of the elephant in the room, if you will, and that is just a quick comment from each of our panelists about the COVID-19 impact on the industry. And just to get through this quickly, just so you know who's with us here today. Normally I ask the speakers to introduce themselves, but I'll tell you today we have Grant Feek, CEO of Tread, Mike Darrow, CEO of TrueCar, Jessica Stafford, Senior Vice President, Consumer Solutions at Cox Automotive, and Cathy Palochko, Senior Vice President, Practice Lead, Automotive Performance Solutions for GP Strategies, who wins the award for the longest title. So let's go first to Grant. Grant, what have you seen in terms of industry-wide impact from COVID-19? What's happening out there on the street?
So for our platform, it's been, I would say, a driver of growth, both on the supply and demand side, as consumers are looking for ways.
And for those people who don't know what Tread's all about, maybe you should explain that quickly.
Sure. So we are a dealership in about a third of the country, licensed dealership, independent licensed dealership, and the customer journey for sellers and buyers with our process doesn't transpire at a traditional brick and mortar location, although we do have brick and mortar locations. So the customer journey is more similar to a P2P transaction. And what we found is, consumers are looking to avoid crowds right now. So looking to avoid the DMV, looking to avoid dealerships, banks, those sorts of things. And that's something that our platform enables. So for us, I would say that the pandemic has been a net driver of growth, although, I think in the long term, you can look at it as sort of just an acceleration of what would have happened anyways, I believe.
But you've had to, your model is taking a lot of the fear and risk out of that P2P proposition, but you probably still had to make some adaptations for COVID-19.
We added some protocols around test driving, suggesting that the consumer and the seller and the buyer sit diagonally in the car, thereby keeping them 6 feet away from each other, because we don't recommend that a seller allow a vehicle to be test drive without them being in it.
Okay, so you're saying it's kind of a net positive.
I believe, yeah. So far for
us, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say it. It's a terrible tragedy for the country, but it's okay that it's a net positive. So, Michael,
those are your words.
What's happening from your perspective out there in the pre and post COVID experience buying a car?
I think the things we've seen, Roger, and the metrics were all clear as to the impact on the consumer and the retailers at the end of March and then early April, when everybody was trying to figure out what the uncertainty of COVID would be, and then the rebound started in May and June with the industry. Our brand skews a little more new car than some of our competitors, so we're in a situation now where we're cheering for the OEMs to get caught up on production. Dealer inventories are at an all-time low.
That's not down, prices up.
That's right. And if anybody who followed the reports of the large dealer groups, they all had great third quarters, and based on exactly what you said. Their grosses were up in new car, in many cases above their used car grosses. So, there's been a bit of a purging of the inventory. I know the OEMs are getting back to work and getting started again, and that plays a big part in the role we play in helping consumers navigate a robust inventory, a robust incentive environment where they've got a lot of choices to make. So, that's probably where we've got our eye focused now is, tracking the OEMs, getting caught up on inventory. And, I would echo what Grant said. It was a terrible situation with the pandemic, but it has accelerated some thinking in our industry and has been a positive driver to, I think, what will be certainly positive change.
So Jessica, you have a unique perspective with the consumer journey. What have you seen pre and post COVID?
Absolutely. Likewise, building on what Grant and Mike have said, as terrible, obviously, as the situation is, I think it's accelerated the progress and innovation in our industry 10 years forward in the last 6 months for sure. Not only the innovation and the solutions and the tools, but the adoption and the understanding and kind of the acceptance of some of these new norms that are out there and that are demanded by consumers. So, we know that we have a ton of dealers and sellers out there that have adopted new tools for digital buying tools and new ways to get remote on-demand kind of selling.
Touchless kind of propositions.
Contactless, virtual walk around, contactless service and drop off and home delivery, at home test drives, all of these components. We launched a suite of services in the beginning back in March called Dealer Home Services, which was really just the beginning of enabling, our local dealers and all of our customers and partners out there to provide those services that consumers were demanding. And I guess that's the point, is that what the other part of what this pandemic has done is accelerated consumer demands that were there already. So we know that shoppers were wanting more of that digital process, and they were expecting more of it out of our automotive industry, just like they get and everything else they do, at home grocery delivery and food delivery, and everything comes to us as consumers at home. And so I think this pandemic has also just accelerated that consumers out there, the mass public, expect to be able to purchase a car the way they purchase everything else, and they want that convenience and time saving.
And Cathy, your perspective? Oh, you're muted.
Got it. So our perspective as a professional services company is really, how is this impacting the worker? And what we're seeing is we have a generation of car salespeople that were really good on their feet, really good face to face, and now they can't be that, right? They have to interact with all these new tools, as Jessica was talking about. And we really see dealers kind of falling into two groups: those that were the eager adopters, right? The pandemic hit and they're like, oh, finally, here's a reason that I can do this. And I've been waiting for this opportunity to really show that the tools that I have and how good I am at process. And then we have those that are the hibernators that are kind of waiting for the old normal to settle back in. And the reality is it isn't. So we're working right now with dealers to kind of swing the pendulum. As good as you were on your feet, you need to be as good or better than that online. And when we settle into the new normal that is somewhere in between, you're going to be covered.
So I have my question here that I just have to ask, because I love the quote from Wes Lutz, who previously headed up the NADA, that I sell new cars to legitimize my used car business. Now, Michael, you've already indicated that new cars are more important for you and your and the services that you bring to dealerships. But Cathy, what do you think about that dynamic between new and used, and what do you see happening, and how is it changing in the context of this dealer disruption?
So I think it's interesting. There's really three, when you think about it, there's three segments, right? There's new cars, there's used cars, and then there's what falls in the middle. And certified pre-owned, a lot of manufacturers have certified pre-owned, and it's really about helping the customers discover what's right for them. What's the best value proposition for me? And I think that's a lot of times where dealerships struggle, because we still tend to either be new car focused or used car focused. And the reality is we need to be all car focused and find what works best for the consumer. And that's where I see an opportunity to really ramp up the skills of our salespeople, our sales professionals out there. Is, let's not be so concerned about what I need to sell. Let's be more concerned about what the consumer wants to buy. And let's be focused on helping them through that buying process versus forcing them through our selling process.
What's the, Jessica, what's your perspective from where Cox is?
Sure. I mean, I agree very much with what Cathy was saying as far as just what the consumer behavior shows us. At the end of the day, as our industry continues to progress, shoppers are cross shopping. We still see absolute segments that skew new, used, but at the end of the day, they're discovering what's right for them. Particularly, again, not to keep bringing it back, but to the past 7-8 months and the craziness that we're all in. Any of those past kind of silos and funnels that we might have talked about are all mixed up. And so you've got shoppers who are considering now and discovering ways to buy new that didn't think that they could or would, or are now buying used because they can't find what they wanted in new. And so we're seeing the supply demand and how that then impacts consumer behavior and vice versa kind of go all over the place right now. So I think to that point, it's just more important than ever to really consider having the right vehicles that the consumer out there is looking for right now in your area for your market share.
Am I a bad person to note that dealers make more money on used cars, both on the actual vehicle itself and on servicing the vehicle after the sale?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was a bad person. So, Michael, what's your perspective on the used versus new dynamic in the context of our digital disruption frame?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And Roger, I've got to be transparent and disclaim my background. The first 20 years of my experience in the automotive vertical was with the OEMs. So I do have a bit of an allegiance to the new car side of the business. And I think the counter quote to the one you used was, I was calling on a very successful new car dealer, and he said, I asked him about his used car business, and he said, if I do my job right, that's my second opportunity to sell that car. So he sold the car once as new. He took care of the customer. It came back to him as a used car, and he had an opportunity to, resell the car. I think Q3 showed us that the new car business is vibrant. There's new entries coming into it. The new Broncos coming, supposedly sold out for the first year. The new market, there's a bunch of great products coming to the industry that I think will be great. And I think if the OEMs do a job of controlling inventory, the new car business can be profitable for a franchise dealer, and it becomes his source of used cars through leasing, through taking care of the customers, through a service drive. So I think the two go hand in hand. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for digital advancement in both new and used car sales for sure.
Is it any easier is it any easier to sell a used versus a new car from a paperwork standpoint?
I think a lot of that may be regulated at different levels of the state and all that, but I think dealers have become efficiency in managing that paperwork piece. I think there's challenges around the used car piece in establishing confidence with the consumer about, how many miles were on the car, how it was taken care of, those sort of things, which is a challenge in the used car space that you don't have on the new car side. But, the two certainly go hand in hand. And I think a lot of traffic ends up at a new car dealership thinking they're a new car buyer and end up on the used car lot with a CPO, a beautiful, lightly used CPO unit or something like that. So dealers have done a good job of making that connection between new and used.
So Grant, I looked at the 45-second how-to video on your website, which certainly would be terrifying, I think, to the average dealer, that you've greased the skids on, acquiring a vehicle to such an extent. There's no competition when it comes to how easy it is to transfer a vehicle P2P versus going to the dealership. What are your thoughts in terms of that dealer disruption? Is the reaction you're getting in the marketplace reflecting that?
I would say that it's actually far easier to trade a car in to a dealership than it is to sell it P2P, certainly historically, because, you take it in, you drop it off, here are the keys, you're done.
But if you're talking about a trade-in, then it's part of a vehicle sale, and that's not a brief exchange.
Well, I would say trade-in is even easier than selling your car to a dealer, because you're also where you need to be to buy a car, right? So from like a convenience and a logistics standpoint, I would say it's actually far easier and probably faster in some ways to sell a car to a dealer. The kicker is, though, because the alternative, Roger, is to go onto Craigslist, right? And now you're really talking about a lot of legwork. So you have to know how to market your car. You have to know how to price your car. You have to know how to handle paperwork. You have to know how to get to somebody's bank. You have to make sure you're not going to get shot. There's a lot of stuff involved there.
Maybe I'm not understanding what a TRED is all about. I thought you sort of take all that fear and apprehension out of the process, no?
Well, yeah. So our belief is that, it's possible, depending who you talk to or who you listen to, that, we're headed for a recession, right? and unemployment rate is higher than it's been since the Great Depression, actually higher than it was during the Great Depression, et cetera, et cetera. So, our belief from kind of day one with what we're doing, which is, I think there's a place for it, and it's very different than what dealers are doing. What we're trying to do is organize the Craigslist world. We're not trying to, get into the traditional dealerships sandbox, if you will.
Well, exactly, yes.
But on the Craigslist side of things, there's a lot of opportunity for people to get a lot more value out of the transaction. So we believe that into the future, will people be buying new cars? Well, there are huge advantages to buying new cars. OEMs have really, really heavily subsidized financing. Financing is a huge piece of purchasing a vehicle. So to the extent, obviously, OEMs are subsidizing financing and pricing, I think you will see the new car space do well. Otherwise, I think people are going to be increasingly price sensitive and probably looking to shop used. And I believe platforms that are predicated on value, how can you add, and by value, I mean price of the vehicle. You're getting as much as possible for your car and you're paying as little as possible for your car. And that's really what we enable. I mean, if you compare an X5 or take any car you want, look at what it costs on Tread, and then look at what it costs on Carvana or Vroom or Shift or any of these other platforms. You'll see that our vehicles are thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of dollars cheaper. And then conversely, if you enter your car to sell on Carvana or Vroom or Shift, and you compare that to what you see on Tread, you'll get thousands of dollars less. So that's kind of what it's not so much about making the process necessarily easier, because the easiest thing to do is to go to the dealer still, we believe, especially if the dealer has the car you want.
I was just thinking in terms of the processes for getting the car inspected, and presumably you've got, funds held in escrow or whatever, and identification of the relevant parties. So you're not meeting some stranger with a handgun somewhere who's going to take your car and your money. So that's where I was kind of going. You've got kind of a turnkey solution to remove all that trepidation and concern. I think I want to switch gears a little bit, but not everybody will have an answer to this question. So this is really for Jessica almost exclusively, unless somebody else wants to comment on this. And that is the proposition of the vehicle subscription. So, there's buying a car, there's leasing a car, there's renting a car. Michael was talking about there are people who are unemployed, and there are easier ways to get into a car, like renting a car or maybe a subscription, as opposed to a lease or a purchase, which requires validating your employment and income, which some people may not be able to do right now. But the subscription model is attractive. Scott Painter, your former founder, is talking about getting into the game with a subscription program. Hertz, in the midst of their Chapter 11, is getting into the subscription game. Some OEMs are in there. It seems like it makes sense, but what's and clearly Cox is in that business as well. What's your perspective on subscriptions, how they're evolving, and what kind of role they'll play in this digital disruption?
Yeah, it's an interesting space, and like you mentioned, I mean, as Cox, we have a couple of different angles at it. Most directly with our platform called Clutch, that offers kind of the back end technology behind a subscription platform. And at the end of the day, right now, a lot of our studies show there are some surface level, obviously, with COVID this year, the idea of sharing anything with anyone got a little scarier, right? And so that I think that shifts a bit of consumer behavior. But across the board, what we're seeing is that subscription is and will continue to be a big part of, to your point, the digital disruption in our industry. Some of the barriers that have been at play around providers, sellers or kind of that side of the business having the right tools and technology in place, the ability to offer the type of subscription model that a consumer might want. If a consumer wants to switch cars very often, it's not quite as economically sound. But this is because this is brand new and we're all figuring this out and building the right platforms and the right functionality and logistics to make it all work. What we're seeing now is in the most recent studies, there's a couple of different angles at this. One is, of course, that what consumers are looking for and what our industry is starting to design is is subscription that revolves all around flexibility, right? So the idea that I can keep one vehicle for a long amount of time or a short amount of time, but that optionality, that flexibility is at the end of the day what consumers are looking for. The other side that we're seeing is that this other model of subscription products that come to market more in a way to complement your lifestyle as a consumer versus replace vehicle ownership. So what this might be is like the next step as we step into the future of full subscription in a lot of cases where you might not have a full-time subscription, but you might be looking for something to supplement your current household ownership model. Again, I think that this is all completely connected to what the world is going through right now, that no matter what is going to have a demand, or an impact on it. We did a recent Auto Trader consumer segmentation study that was interesting. It showed that more than half of in-market shoppers right now would consider a car subscription service, which is a big deal. Now, a lot of that has to do with the flexibility and the optionality, also the cost. There's a perception from a consumer standpoint that perhaps they'd be able to get into a subscription for less than they're currently paying for an ongoing payment for a vehicle. For us as an industry, and I would say for the rest of the industry as well, not only us as providers, but dealers and manufacturers, the role right now is to educate consumers and to make sure that we have all that information out there. We talk about price transparency and how important that is in the car purchasing process, making sure that consumers understand how much am I spending right now, month by month, on my vehicle, all things considered. Because most of us are used to, we know what our lease payment is, or we know what our monthly payment is, but we're not adding in all of the other attributes. In this subscription model, a lot of that's going to be added in. And so while there might be a perception that the price would be lower at first glance, it might look slightly higher. And so I think right now we're still at that point where we need to really educate consumers on what it could look like. But we see it continuing to be a really important part of the future of digital disruption and the future of just car ownership in general.
So, Cathy, I'm not going to ask you about car subscriptions. I am going to ask you about what are the biggest challenges in dealers embracing digital, and perhaps what is the latest development in the digitalization of dealers?
So I really think this comes down to an issue of control. The customer and the dealer are right now wrestling for control, and the customer is winning because digital retail is empowering the customer. But the dealers are struggling because for decades, it's all about been controlling the sales process and controlling the customer. And so dealers really have to learn how to give up that control in order to get control, by the way.
Because the customer's coming in they've already done all their research, and this is the price.
Hours online. Yeah, they've spent hours online, they're interacting with whether you have, individual widgets or you have a full digital retailing platform. It's all about sharing that information and empowering them to basically desk their own deal, and to what extent are you comfortable with that? How seamless is your process from online to in-store becomes a big challenge for dealers. And the more that dealers empower the customers to do more to facilitate that self-service, if you will, the happier the customers are, and grosses go up. You see consumers accepting first pencils at a higher rate when they have the ability to make choices and make decisions from the comfort of their living room. It's about a mindset shift.
My concern is we're talking a good game in this digitalization proposition, and then you or I or whoever, we go to the dealer, and the biggest change is the desk with the electronic contract where you're signing. Like, that's it. That's like the biggest improvement, and you're still stuck there for 4 or 5 hours trying to get that darn car, and it's taking you way longer than it took you to buy your house. So is there a breakthrough out there somewhere?
There is, and I think the key difference here is there's a big difference between implementation and adoption. So what we have is a lot of dealers that are implementing tools. They're plugging them into their website or into their showroom, but they're not philosophically adopting them. And that's where we're helping dealers kind of break that down. We're helping them rethink and reimagine their business to respond to convenience, flexibility, and control. We're helping them evaluate business models and technologies, examine the impact of those models and technologies on the work. How do we do the work? How do we add value to the process? The worker, what needs to change about the job? what kind of people do I need to hire in the future, right? I'm not looking for killer salespeople. I'm looking for people who are very customer service oriented, who are very technologically savvy. And then finally, the workplace. How does my showroom need to look different? You know, I need to have people that are equipped with mobile phones and the ability to do video walkarounds or video test drives. You know, I need to have that flexibility that I can send people securely out to people's driveways.
I'm going to probe you one more time, and all of my experiences related to my BMW dealer here in Sterling, Virginia, which is BMW of Sterling, of course. But years ago, you know, one of the sales guys I saw on his desk, he had a certificate from Auto Alert, which was a recent presenter earlier today at this event. And I asked, I said, well, what's Auto Alert? Oh, well, it tells him when the car has a scheduled maintenance based on an estimation of how much mileage he's driven, which was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. This is a couple of years ago. I know Auto Alert is advanced well beyond this, but it was absurd to me because BMW is connected to their cars. They know the exact mileage. They don't have to estimate. They don't need Auto Alert. They have their own teleservices to notify the dealership of when services are required. So is there this going on, this lack of integration between the OEM's vision of digital retailing and the actual dealer's vision of digital retailing? And do the retailers recognize they have a problem?
I think some retailers, Mike, I know you want to jump in there. I think some retailers, and this goes back to my eager adopters and my hibernators, right? My eager adopters, they've made the mindset change. They're on the path. They know they need to hand over control. They know they need to work with the empowered consumer. And then we have the hibernators who are still resistant and they're waiting for the old normal to come back. So our work is really about helping dealers change that mindset and carefully step into the future. Because the other thing that's true at retail is a lot of dealers will try something, they'll ready, fire, aim, and then it didn't work, and oh well, that didn't work. So we kind of help them step through the process to more carefully mitigate those risks and really look at their entire operation as an ecosystem. Because when you change a process, you have to change a pay plan, right? How do you do those things together? I
definitely need to get Mike in, and then a quick comment from Grant, because we found our way to 1 o'clock way too quickly.
Too quick.
So dealers are up against, you know, Amazon and Facebook and all of these digital competitors, Google. What are your thoughts about this and where things stand and what has to happen?
Yeah, I think those names that you mentioned, Roger, have certainly set the tone for how consumers want to consume products. Understanding that buying an automobile is much more complex than buying a book, and it's going to take more involvement in order to get that done. I think the dealers I talk to have made the mental shift to understand that you reduce the time of sale and you create efficiency by moving more of the process online. So the consumer can calculate an accurate payment. They can get a value for their trade before they go into a dealership. Those sort of things accelerate the process. The hard part is right in front of us, though, which is the data able to be passed back and forth with the current dealer systems in order to be accurate? And that's the challenge I think the industry will go into now, is solving that piece, because the current dealer systems were built to support an on-site sale, right? Not a digital sale. And what we're working on is communication with the dealer and efficiency of data, so that we can bring much of that sales process online for.
I hope you're not suggesting that Reynolds is using old technology. Hey, Grant, can you take us out with just a quick comment on what Tread is doing to fix this? I did say a quick comment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the question of what can be taken digital, what can be taken online is really interesting. I think the riddle or the puzzle or what you have to figure out, the haiku, is the test drive. And so, you know, do consumers need to test drive a vehicle? I think the transaction is easy. Like, that's digitized. It can happen on your porch, in your pool, wherever you want. That's going to happen. You don't need to talk to banks. You don't need to do any of that stuff. The question is, in my mind, like, what type of asset will a consumer need to physically scratch and sniff and test drive? And I think a CPO style vehicle Clearly, there are companies out there that have proven that you don't need to test drive it, and you can use VR or spinning technology or cool UIs to make that happen, and return policies. But I think the more interesting question in the next 5 to 10 years will be, on the used side, of course, is what I'm talking about. How will consumers be willing to purchase at scale? Where the bulk of the used car volume is. Will there be a willingness to purchase that product sight unseen? Or, so we know that Joe or Sally, car buyer, will buy a 2-year-old BMW sight unseen, no problem. Will they buy a 10-year-old Ford sight unseen? And I think that question is kind of what we think about a lot, and will drive a lot of the way this industry looks in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Thank you, panelists. And back to you, Haley.